Hello. I have chosen to highlight the immigrant community for this macro planning level presentation. While the touted ideal is of America being a nation of heroic immigrants, this is a paradox because immigrants have been and still are treated as objects of scorn, distaste, mistrust, and disapproval in many facets of daily life. Specifically, I want to acknowledge the challenges they face trying to assimilate into the American culture and their new way of life. I am going to propose a systematic change in the way citizenship is determined. Let's take a look at the numbers. Immigrants are a sizable group. The U.S. saw its peak of immigrants in the 1800s at 15%, and as you can see from this slide, we are just under that figure now at 14%. And in fact, if you add any portion of the undocumented figure, another 17 million, we're surpassing it already. As for citizenship, 2022 was a record year. More than 1 million immigrants became U.S. citizens, which is the largest number in 15 years. While that is an encouraging data point, the fact is that nearly half of the immigrant population never becomes citizens. Considering one of the core objectives of our immigration policy is providing a path to citizenship, I say that is an abysmal failure. Why? It's because our immigration policy focuses on enforcement and process. It is not concerned about the individuals. There is a greater ambivalence about how immigrants are cared for once they are here. We do not actually have an immigrant policy, and this is what I feel we need to change. First, let's take a brief look at why people would ever want to immigrate here in the first place. Immigrants' needs and wants in coming to the United States are diverse and cannot be lumped all together. Here are the 4 primary reasons immigrants come to America. As you can see from this list, all of these are perfectly rational and understandable, certainly from a humanitarian perspective. Let us also keep in mind that the process to get to America is a long one. It is sometimes dangerous, usually costly. It takes individuals time just to settle in, to process the separation or perhaps unification of their family, and to start to feel generally safe in their surroundings. They are not in a place where they can be thinking about or caring about getting citizenship until much later. Meanwhile, they face discrimination on a wide variety of fronts: race, religion, their immigrant status, but also language ability, class, their perceived foreignness. Immigrants actually report that perceptions of discrimination increase with the amount of time that they are in the country. This is a troubling phenomenon considering they cannot even apply for citizenship for several years. So this cannot be a comfortable time in their lives. What you see on this slide are 2 distinctly different mindsets or philosophies in regards to what makes for good citizenship. On the left, we can see that our government agency has a fairly linear view saying you must be committed to a unifying principle that binds us as Americans. But what is that unifying principle? According to our policy, it would be that you can speak English, that you've lived in the same place for a period of time, or you can recite a certain number of U.S. history facts on an exam. Now, does anyone actually believe that those are unifying principles? Anyone? No, of course not. What unifies us and binds us as Americans and as human beings is on the right of this slide. So my proposal is that we change the criteria for citizenship so that it more closely aligns to those principles, the things that actually bind us. And when we do that, we shift our goal toward assimilation or integration, more so than just simple citizenship. This flyer from Canal Alliance's New American campaign lists the benefits to citizenship from the immigrant's perspective. And I'd like to note that things like finding jobs or the right to vote are actually at the bottom of the list, which is completely contrary to the way our USCIS office interprets our policy. In their view, those are the top reasons for citizenship. So this is just an indicator to me of how our policy is skewed toward our own vantage point and not from the perspective of those that it's intended to serve. The immigration policy as it is today is one of the most complex things you're ever going to run into. It's time consuming, it's years and years and years of your life, it's hundreds if not thousands of dollars in fees that you pay, and those fees just keep going up and up and up. It just doesn't make any sense why we put up these kind of barriers for people to try to get them to become citizens of this United States. It just doesn't lend itself toward a welcoming environment. Please, yes, become a citizen of our country. It's just one barrier after another. And so I propose we move away from this type of model and over toward more of an immigrant-focused policy that provides services and helps them to assimilate in ways that actually matter and in ways they can be successful as a citizen of this country. If we did that, I think we would see more success in this program. A major development toward that progress is this legislation. The New Deal for New Americans Act was introduced in both the House and the Senate during the current congressional cycle. They are both in committee, and my hope is that they will advance to the floor for a vote and will eventually be signed into law by our president. Should this legislation pass, it would almost immediately create the kind of service-focused programs I feel our immigrant communities need. From a macro-level planning perspective, this is a significant step that is already underway. Of course, the next steps for us would be to lobby as hard as possible to get this legislation passed. A concentrated effort of organizing and advocacy is crucial here. Whether the New Deal for New America becomes law or not, changes can still be made to make citizenship attainable. The first step, however, in this, as in all initiatives, is to hear from the community itself. Find out what is most useful for the immigrants themselves. Enlist help from grassroots organizers and advocacy groups to steer those conversations. Because unless they are handled with a great deal of cultural humility and active listening, then the immigrant community's voice will probably still not get heard. Next, various outreach is going to be essential, from engaging with city, state, federal officials, and using media, including social media, to spread the message and garner more support. And additionally, of course, funds are going to be needed. Now, the government already has a grant program that funds various citizenship and integration efforts. It's called the Citizenship and Integration Grant Program. Get as much of that $25 million as you can, and then get more funds through other channels, such as fundraising campaigns, private donors, etc. Can this work? Well, absolutely. With the support of the immigrant community, they are our #1 resource. As you can see on this slide, I've included 2 examples of other marginalized groups who have been wildly successful at lobbying for changes and expanding their rights, even though they are a smaller group than our current immigrant community. The LGBTQ community was only 7% of our population. People with disabilities are 13%. Immigrants are currently at over 14% and growing. A group of that size can definitely make an impact in any part of the process that they choose. That's why their commitment and support of this initiative is the #1 key for the change. But it is also one of the biggest challenges. Immigrants historically try to keep a low profile. Even when they do naturalize, data shows that they are less likely to vote than natural citizens. Whether that's due to cultural norms from their home country, or socioeconomic factors, or institutional barriers, many immigrants simply never even try to become citizens or bother to register to vote when they do naturalize. Now, there are several advocacy groups right now that are actively pushing campaigns to try to improve that. They are trying to increase the voter turnout in the immigrant community. And we certainly hope that that will be the case, and we will see evidence of that in the next election cycle, because they must form a solid block of potential voters for the folks on Capitol Hill to put any effort toward measures related to immigrants' needs forward. And while legislative change is not make or break, it certainly would make the steps to progress much faster and smoother. A major objective is to transform our immigration policy into an immigrant policy by changing the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services from an enforcement agency focused on intensive vetting and fraud detection back to a benefits agency concerned with customer service. Passage of the New Deal for New Americans Act would certainly expedite that, but the administration can take steps now to impact that kind of positive change. Of course, the main goal of my macro level plan is to influence change in our nation's treatment of immigrants. President Roosevelt's New Deal taught us that providing support to American citizens in various ways makes America stronger. The New Deal for New Americans Act is the next chapter in that same story. Naturalized citizens match or even exceed native-born by key metrics such as college degrees, percent of employment, and average personal income. Our country does well when our immigrants do well. Helping to ease their integration and assimilation is in everyone's best interest.